There are a lot of different statistics that I love to talk about when it comes to clinical trials and just the prevalence of disease in America. As a clinical research scientist, data is very important to me, and I like to look at those numbers. So, in America alone, the prevalence of chronic illness and people suffering from at least one major chronic illness is 129 million individuals. That's a big number.
Yeah, for sure.
So part of my mission as, bringing integrity first clinical trials to this area is giving people a treatment option because that's what clinical trials are. So there are a lot of people who are treatment resistant, have tried many, many different therapies and drugs and haven't had success with that. And what clinical trials do is kind of bring a new treatment option to the table for those individuals. And that's specifically for chronic illness. Granted, there's so many different therapeutic indications out there. And the beauty of owning my own research site is I get the protocols first. I get to see what these drugs can do, what they have done in the prior phases, and really analyze that based on what our community might need. And so looking again at statistics, just in Youngstown, the poverty level is insane compared to the rest of the country. I think here in Youngstown, it is 3 times the national average.
Wow.
And so with that, people can't afford medications, just your basic healthcare needs. A lot of the GLP-1 therapies right now, even though they're trying to get them lowered, people still can't afford that, especially here in Youngstown. So what clinical trials do is offer some of these new novel medications at no charge. People get compensated for their time and inconvenience for participating in the trial. And it gives people that, access to something that is not yet widely available to the rest of the public.
So this sort of like experimentation track, which kind of pushes on the medical orthodoxy of, pharmaceuticals and what the status quo is. Do you have some resistance from sort of like the medical community that wants to kind of keep these new treatments sort of on the fringe and almost like undermine them so they're not as trusted as, proper science or whatever science?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, as with anything, money really changes people, and money is always at the forefront of people's minds. And that's what I kind of want to push against, the resistance. This is not about people making money off of these things and maybe keeping things secretive, or not advocating for current therapies and things like that. Hence integrity first.
Right.
So that, in choosing that name, I've been in the research industry for well over 10 years now. I've seen and been in big corporations where the CEO's pockets were getting filled. And I had tried to go to my leadership saying like, hey, we should be paying our coordinators more money because they're the ones on the ground level doing all the hard work and collecting the data and trying to allocate funds, where they should be, and, providing access to more rural areas, but always got shut down. And so I was put in a unique position by getting laid off this spring when I was 20 weeks pregnant. I was national director of operations for the company that I was with. So I was getting sent all over the place to open new sites in other areas and manage, multi-site operations. Got laid off and kind of lit a fire in me. Like, I'm doing all this for other companies in other states, and look at the need right here in my own community. And I've worked operations from the ground up. I've done literally every single part of research that really you can do, from coordinator to clinical trial manager, director of national operations. And so I had to do a lot of self-reflection. And do I want to go back to corporate? Do I want to try to find another job with these huge corporations? Or do I want to make a change for the things that I stand for and that I want to advocate for that just kept getting shut down by C-suite executives?
So give me some examples of sort of tracks that are more novel, that are sort of in the experimental phase to get,
Yeah. So we actually have a couple trials that are anticipated to start mid-December. And we are looking at weight loss and type 2 diabetes.
Okay.
And so what I like to do, or I like to kind of choose when it comes to clinical trials, are the later phases. There's 4 different phases of clinical trials, 1 through 4. Phase 1, we're looking at, is it safe? Phase 2, does it work? So after phase 1 is done, we know that it's generally safe, and we're moving on to now, okay, well, does this drug even work for what we want it to target? Phase 3 are the ones that I like because we generally know that it's now safe and also effective. So at phase 3, we're looking at what dose is best to start people on. So I like the phase 3 trials. They try to recruit more people into the trials. And so with that, you give more people access, because the earlier phases, they're looking at very small numbers of individuals to participate, obviously because they don't know yet if it's safe and effective.
Right.
So they're not going to subject a lot of individuals to those earlier phases.
So do you have an example? Okay, so weight loss
Mhm.
and diabetes, is it sort of like treatments that have licensure from a pharmaceutical company and that's putting through private trials to
Mhm.
find out?
Yeah, exactly. So there's many different types of research, and the research that we do at Integrity First is considered industry research. There's academia, which is kind of self-explanatory.
Theoretical.
Yeah, it's in academic settings, academic hospitals, universities, and things like that. Industry is privately funded by pharmaceutical companies. Now, that could be a big pharmaceutical company or like a smaller biotech that is, in early phase of development. And a lot of times you'll see, as you look into these things, that the smaller biotechs that are onto something with, drugs that they're developing that turn out to be pretty promising, they always get bought by the big guys. And
Right.
so even if there is a clinical trial that a larger pharmaceutical company like your Eli Lilly's, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, the chances are they probably bought a little guy out, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's the kind of research that we do. I'm embedded into Vital Evolution out of Canfield. They're a wellness clinic, and they specialize in weight loss right now, as well as a multitude of other things, testosterone replacement therapy, things like that. But the doctors that I have collaborated with for Integrity First clinical trials are all internal medicine. And so that kind of lets me not have a limit for the kind of trials that I try to bring into Youngstown. I'm not limited to psychiatry or gastroenterology. Internal med kind of sees everything. So I don't have to be kind of put into a little box there.
Now, the people who seek out being part of these clinical trials,
Mhm.
are they general population, or they're
Mhm.
people that are just kind of desperate where systems failed them and they're looking
Yeah.
for alternatives?
It's a little bit of everything. So, yes, also people who are desperate and haven't had luck with their current therapies or medications, but also, when I first started out in my research career, I worked in a geriatric psychiatry neuroimaging lab that studied late life mood disorders. And I'm just throwing this number out there. This isn't like factual, just based on my experience. Roughly probably 90 to 95% of individuals who came in with late life depression came in because they didn't have purpose, and they were depressed because they were retired. You would think that would be like a great time in your life, like, oh, I'm
Right.
retired, I don't have to go to my 9 to 5. But these individuals lost that sense of purpose because they didn't have their normal day to day where they get up and go and do something that they are proud of. And so, with that being said, they wanted to participate in research to contribute to science and the advancement of medications and to help other people. And that's also what we do with clinical trials. It's not just about giving access to the people who really could benefit from an alternative medication or don't have treatment options. It's also thinking about my children and my children's children and the future of medications out there. And I think I don't think, I know there's a huge distrust right now in the pharmaceutical industry from your general population. And I want to be part of that change. I want to be the ground level site collecting and submitting the data so that I know that there's integrity involved. I know that what I'm submitting is accurate and reliable and repeatable. Because a lot of times people think, oh, well, it's an experiment. And, again, going back to the money thing, like people are just trying to make money. And that's not my mission. My mission is truly about bringing access and about integrity in clinical trials and moving that needle forward in advancement of medications.
Now, do you think when science is kind of pushing against status quo and floating the fact that we might not have it all figured out and there needs to be more innovation, so pushing against the sort of like the values or the consensus of where science is at, do you think that's why the public has a little mistrust in it? Because that pushback is like, I see from a doctor's end, like you need to stick with the status quo because it's assured and it's a high percentage of probability. But the new stuff could make even things better. So like it's the bigger risk, you know what I mean? When you start tangling with things that are kind of against that status quo.
Yeah. And this all kind of ties into why the consent process is so important in research, not just for participants who want to be in clinical trials, but also for doctors to be aware of the risks and the benefits of these newer drugs. Because at least as of now, there's nothing that is risk-free. There's always going to be some type of side effect listed. And in clinical trials, that's my job. That is my job to list every single thing that someone experiences if they're in our clinical trial. And with that, I'm privy to knowing how things work. And so that's also something that I think is important for the public to know as well, is I've had people in clinical trials who, the minute you sign that consent form, you are officially in the clinical trial. And sometimes they experience things before even taking the investigational drug that we're studying. We still have to list that as an adverse event. And so being able to kind of look at those statistics that are, published from the phase 2 trials and the earlier trials, not everyone knows how to do that. And so that's part of my mission coming in, being a scientist and knowing how to analyze the data of, what really are the risks here. And I can make those informed decisions on what I want to bring to my community. Now, I don't have a magic ball that says, oh, well, this study is going to be the best with the least amount of side effects. But I can use my critical thinking skills that, God-given, and that I've learned throughout my career and in schooling to say, well, phase 2 data looks pretty good on this one. It's looking to be, best in class or among some of the better drugs that are out there. And I get to make that choice and say, you know what, let's try this clinical trial and not this other one.
So public policy seems to like take the aggregate where when you have something that's safe or, a high possibility of success, and it's 99%, right? But then the doctor who's actually seeing the patient can ferret out and find out if, even though I want to make sure you're not the 1%, right? So
exactly.
If there's an adverse effect on it, I want to make sure that's not you.
Yeah.
And you give a sugar cube to 100% of the population, and you can have something like that kill somebody, right? Unless you have an endpoint doctor to be able to say, hold up, sugar's not for you, kind of a thing.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of what we do at the ground level is there's a lot of monitoring. They're coming in sometimes weekly, sometimes twice a week to be monitored. We're calling them. We're doing telehealth visits. We're telling them to call us. So we are available 24/7. I don't care if it's 3 a.m. If you're waking up vomiting, you better be calling me because I want to know that so that we can, choose a course of action based on what you're experiencing. And that's where, the doctors come in play who are collaborating with me and working with me on these clinical trials is, people come in for what is considered an eligibility screening. We're looking at their past medical history. We're not going to put someone in a clinical trial that has these major underlying health conditions that are maybe not associated with the drug or therapy that we're studying because it wouldn't be safe.
Right.
And so we're able to take multiple factors of their medical history, their current lifestyle, things that really stand out to us that could be problematic being in a clinical trial. And we're gonna say doesn't sound like a good idea.
Right. Well, what about variables? Like,
Mhm.
a lot of these trials, they don't take enough things into consideration
Mhm.
before they come to some kind of conclusion. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of, especially like neurological disorders, are coming down to so many different things that can be added into those. So when you're
Mhm.
doing a clinical trial, how do you take enough stuff out of the equation and
Mhm.
control these patients enough to be able to extrapolate enough data from it to know if something
Yeah.
is effective or not?
Right. So, as a clinical research scientist, I also have a background in clinical mental health counseling. And so you have to trust that your participants are going to tell you the truth of what's going
Right.
on. And that's a variable that like is uncontrollable. I can't force someone to tell me what is going on, but based on other participants in the trial and what I know about what is expected and what is not expected, um, you know, there are controls. There are a lot of times a healthy group or a placebo arm. And something that I have to accept as a scientist is I can't control everything,
Right.
because I love data, I love time points and different variables, but at the end of the day, I can't control everything and I can't help everyone. So, in my mind, if I'm able to help one person, then I've done my job.
If you can keep them in a contained apartment for the next 5 years
Right,
and
right.
control everything they eat and breathe and think about,
Yeah,
that'd be way
yeah.
easier.
Yeah, well, exactly, because, everything that you do in your day-to-day has an effect on your body. The
Right.
things you eat, the things that you subject yourself to. But, with the earlier phases of clinical trials, we kind of know what to expect, at least from the drug that we're studying. But again, we're looking for participants who are willing to kind of adhere to the protocol and the procedures. It's very problematic for a clinical trial if you get someone coming in, they're like, "Well, I'm not going to change this. I'm not going to do that," because that obviously skews the data.
Right.
If you're telling them like, "Hey, it's a weight loss trial. We have to have a little bit of a reduced caloric intake," and they're still, eating 3 Big Macs a day.
Kind of ruins the data.
Yeah.
So what do you attribute to our area having a higher risk and
Mhm.
excuse me?
Mhm.
What do you attribute that to in our area?
Honestly, going back to the access thing, and I wouldn't necessarily say higher risk, I would say higher prevalence of disease and chronic illness and things that aren't being treated because of lack of access, whether that be health insurance related. We do have Mercy Health here, large hospital system, but it's nothing like, I mean, sorry, Mercy Health, but it's nothing like the Cleveland Clinic or UPMC in Pittsburgh. And so with that, this area, there aren't many other treatment options that people in a larger city would have. Academic research centers are doing research around the clock. They have doctors that are both in practice and doing research. Here, if your doctor is in clinic or, family practice or a specialty office, chances are they're not also part of research and having that treatment option for those individuals that maybe haven't been successful on current therapies and drugs that are out there.
Well, that kind of defined like the early catch is finding out that there is something that's contributing to that. But
Mhm,
what about lifestyle wise or culture wise that
mhm,
creates that you have so many people that are in that basket? Like if you
mhm.
had a scepter and you were like, I want to
Yeah,
change this area and I want to
mhm,
make everybody healthier so that there's
yeah,
nothing to catch if they go to get treatment,
mhm.
what would you do?
Oh, well, I would change the weather first off.
All right, weather number one,
It would
more
get
sun,
people
right?
outside. Yeah,
Need more
absolutely. More
sun,
vitamin
air.
D, more sun, fresh
Okay.
air. Um, that's really the biggest thing that I would change is just the overall lifestyle. I played college sports. I know how important staying in shape is, not just for your physical, um, but also the mental part. You get that rush of endorphins from working out. It hits those neurotransmitters, the feel good ones
Right.
when you work out. And so not many people can get outside, mid-November, December, January. I can keep going because, Ohio. But yeah, I would change getting outside and having access to, more gyms and more things that people can stay in shape and eat better foods that don't have all these additives and extra chemicals in them. Get rid of the glyphosate on the crops. I could go on.
It's gonna get political super fast.
I know. I'm gonna try to like hold back on that part.
So RFK and Make America Healthy Again.
Yeah.
All right. Good intentions. Are you a proponent of what he's trying to do there?
Who doesn't want to make America healthy again? Just in general, this is tough because I don't necessarily want to make it political. However, I think as a clinical research scientist, I have to sit back and say, okay, what is the intent? What is going on? What do they truly want to do? Is it truly that they want to make America healthy again, or is there something truly political to this? And so it's tough because a lot of things that they say, it's hard to trust politicians. So how do you know that what they actually want to do is going to have an effect on our general population? But I can't disagree with wanting to take all these things out of the foods that we eat. Chronic illness is rampant these days. It has increased. Chronic illness is tenfold what it was decades ago. And so we have to sit back and ask those questions, like, why is it that way? And again, if we had a little magic ball here that could just tell us, oh, it's this. But I think there's many variables that go into that. I don't think it's just the food. There's other things too.
So I've sat across from many doctors on this show, and the conversations we had got a couple of them in trouble for what they said to me. But their attitude is this. They can make recommendations that have scientific, factual data in it. And what they have to weigh is what they think is likely to occur. So they can say, go get exercise and eat and do this thing with a high confidence that the person across from them is never going to do any of the things that they could really need. So then they have to go to plan B, which they have to say, what's my probability chart of this person leaving this office and not putting themselves in peril? And so they have to almost take the real, truthful, factual side and shelve it because they know nobody's going to do the thing that they actually should do, and go for the second option, which has, a coin flip or even worse than a coin flip.
Right. Yeah. And, this goes back to the consenting process. So in clinical trials, the consent is the end all be all of our trial, because in that process, I'm not just telling you the benefits. I'm going to tell you the bad and the ugly too of the data from the earlier phases and what we know is expected to happen, whether that be a major side effect or something is, I don't want to minimize any side effects, but something as little as like getting a little bit of nausea. I did a clinical trial a couple years ago where one of these side effects, now it's going to sound scary, but one of the side effects for this Alzheimer's trial were microhemorrhages in the brain. Now, that sounds like super scary, right? Hearing about microhemorrhages in the brain.
We watch those commercials, right? And it says, you could lose 45 pounds. This may result in death. And everybody's like, I know. Sign me up.
I know. Yeah, exactly. And so, I shouldn't laugh, but it's true because they hear, oh, weight loss. Like, let's do it. And then kind of disregard any side effects. But, with that, so microhemorrhages are minor or tiny brain bleeds in the small vessels of the brain. Now, we knew that was expected. That's treatable. Okay. It can be monitored by MRI. Most times, older individuals could have a microhemorrhage in the brain and be asymptomatic or have zero symptoms associated with that brain bleed. Being in a clinical trial, obviously we're monitoring them more and can recognize these things if they occur. The therapeutic area that we were studying, we know is fatal. If there is no treatment and is no cure, you die from said disease. So that's how we weigh risk versus benefit. There is a risk of these microhemorrhages or small brain bleeds by taking this medication, but if we don't try to treat it or try to come up with better medications to treat said disease, that disease will kill you. So that's where the risk versus benefit and that consenting process comes in, because it's so important. I myself have been part of a medical procedure that I did not consent to because I did not know what that doctor was going to do. And so I have like a personal vendetta against that. And it's part of my, you know, mission, values, always at the forefront of my mind of making sure that everyone is fully informed and so that they can make that decision whether or not they want to participate.
Now, these patients that are in the clinical trials,
Mhm.
are they tested? Like, how often are they tested? And do they go through all of the batteries? Like, if there's a hemorrhage
Mhm.
risk, that they are MRI'd once a month or something
Yeah,
like that kind of thing?
absolutely. And it all depends on, what is called the protocol. So we get the protocol as the clinical research site, and we have to follow that to a T because going back to those variables, that's what we can control. We can control that they're getting tested, whether it be monthly or weekly. We do labs, all kinds of blood work looking at different functions of the body, kidneys, liver, things like that, looking at A1C levels, and every clinical trial is different. So each trial and each protocol is going to have those different, what we call time points of when they come in to be seen, what kind of assessments are done. And, the beauty of a clinical trial is if a participant comes in and or calls us and says that they're experiencing some type of side effect or just feeling off, we can have them come in that day and see a doctor. So they have access to, our medical team, like I said, 24/7. And then I can also advise them if it is in the middle of the night, if it's something that we can't physically get to the office, I can advise them like, hey, this is something that can wait till the morning to come see us, or you should probably go get seen now at, the emergency department.
Now, in clinical trials, like when you kind of order, like you mentioned hemorrhage, obviously it's
Hmm.
like a number 20 on the list of risk.
Yeah.
When you start going up the orders of maybe discomfort or
Hmm.
inconvenience, or even when you get to like long-term neurodivergent or
Hmm.
neurodivergent stuff, like, is there something that is not worth the sacrifice? Like, your example of like, you're going to die tomorrow,
Hmm.
or you're going to have a risk of autism later on. Well, that's
Yeah.
an easy choice between those
Hmm.
two, but are there metrics that kind of give level of risk to the patient, knowing
Hmm.
that this is a long-term thing that
Yeah.
might be experienced?
I would say just going back to the earlier phases of the trial, because that's all public data. It's all publicly available. And being the clinical research site, like I said, we get the protocol right from the get-go to, for us to make a decision if this is something that we do want to offer to our community. Is this something that truly could benefit our community? Or is this something that I don't even want to take the risk of seeing participants who may be in this trial? Because at the end of the day, like I'm myself and the doctors and nurse practitioner that I work with, like we are responsible for their safety. And so if it's something that I'm not completely confident in, and my colleagues, the doctors and the nurse practitioner, are also not confident in, we're not going to move forward with doing that clinical trial. And going back to the magic ball, we can't predict what could happen with any clinical trial that we do take on and any particular person that comes in. But we're going to do our best in trying to predict that and trying to, only bring things in that do have minimal risk. But with any clinical trial, there's going to be some risk that we can't control for.
Right. So later on in the week, we're going to do some Tylenol slash autism
Hmm.
comparisons. We're going to talk to an MD that's going to that took one side of it, and then we're going to kind of
Yeah.
have a conversation about. So, your personal opinion, the
Hmm.
relationship between why in this period of time autism is such a high rate,
Hmm.
and trying to get through the contributors to that. Like, what are your
Yeah.
personal feelings on this?
So Research 101, correlation does not equal causation. However, even though autism was diagnosed well before acetaminophen even came out as publicly available, we do have to sit back and ask the question, why is there a higher rate now than there was back then? Just because something existed prior to the development of said drug doesn't mean that it didn't contribute to the higher rates. And so we have to look at those studies that are available and the data that's available and see what the controls were in those trials. How many people were in those trials? Are we looking at a trial that had 15 people or 15,000 people?
Right.
And so yeah, it's tough because you do have to ask the question, why are there higher rates? Is it because now we have better tools to diagnose? I don't know. Is it because there's something going on with our food system and the medications that are currently out there? Possibly. But I don't think there's any definitive answers right
Right.
now.
And, in my industry, we deal with variables all the time.
Mhm.
And when you have 9,000 variables
Yeah.
and you roll the dice and find which were the contributors are, you just have
Mhm.
to eliminate things until you get down to something that you can see some data on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think human beings just have too many chemical variables in
Mhm.
order to take enough out of the general public. Like what are the exposures that apply to every single person on the planet?
Yeah.
And if you get a high rate of autism, it's going to be one of those. Like we just got to
Mhm.
discover which one of those are
Exactly.
in which sequence, and then you add time into it. Like
Mhm.
when were you exposed to that? Like
Yeah.
it would be an impossible haul as far as I'm concerned, unless
Mhm.
you could take 10,000 people, don't expose them to anything,
Right.
and just add things in until you
Mhm.
get the result that
Yeah.
looks like what we're getting in the general public.
And I think it's just part of human nature to trust things that are in alignment with your beliefs, because it's very hard as a human to accept that what we've always known as truth might not be the case. That's very hard from a psychological perspective to
Right.
admit that our belief system was incorrect or possibly flawed. And so there's a lot of self-reflection that comes with that, and looking at the trials that have been done and looking at how the data was collected, and going back to the Tylenol and autism connection or theory. A lot of trials that people are referencing were based off of self-report, saying that there's no link of Tylenol and autism because of this said study or this set of studies. But there's other studies out there that took blood samples and measured the level of acetaminophen directly from the blood. And so we have to look at those things and say, okay, well, we're looking at these studies over here that were all self-report. And again, going back to the different variables, look at eyewitness testimony. There's a reason it doesn't really hold up in court, because the things that we as humans remember are not always accurate.
Right.
So when we're looking at studies that are reporting, oh, there's no link or whatever, whatever they're looking at, and the variables that were looked at are self-report measures, I don't think that's very reliable as a scientist. I want to look at labs. I want to look at blood levels. I want to look at levels of the drug. And with those samples, you can also see other things. Were they taking other medications? Were they on illicit drugs? So, and it's hard because we want to believe things that are aligned with our personal beliefs, but we have to try to be objective and kind of remove that personal bias.
Yeah,
And
but and honestly, like you can make an argument for consensus science because it does take a lot of a group of our population and keep them safer than they would otherwise be.
Mhm.
It's only when you take the small segment that's not included in that safety that
Right.
you still want to find out what's contributing to that one.
Mhm.
So you don't want to throw out consensus and now make 99% of the people unprotected at
Right.
the same time that you have to empathetic enough with those people who have fallen through the cracks and say, we do care about you.
Mhm.
Our data's all polluted. We weren't looking for this thing all along, so we can't
Yeah.
even look historically. We got to
Yeah.
look at it with fresh eyes today and collect enough data to come to a good conclusion to rescue those ones without putting these ones at risk.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, looking at what is the actual risk of autism versus the risk of if you don't treat what is going on with
100%.
Tylenol.
Right.
So, and that's where well-informed doctors and hopefully well-intent people have good intent are sitting there and saying, okay, let
Do
me
you have a
look at
theory, by the way? Like what?
for.
Okay, so like
Mhm.
when you have a kid and they get vaccinated,
Mhm.
right? And they give them Tylenol for what? The
The
shot that they got and the
Yeah, it could
pain in
be
the
that or the
muscle.
fever that is potentially caused from the vaccination.
Like across the board though.
Mhm.
Like my wife, she's, God love her, but whenever the temperature spikes above 100,
Uh-huh.
she wants to give that Tylenol to give
Yeah,
reprieve because the kid is not feeling all that great.
right.
I'm a hard ass when it comes to that, and I'm like, you only do that when it gets dangerous, when the body is
Yeah,
not doing what it should do, and
yeah.
you start getting a dangerous temperature territory.
Mhm.
Then that's your like break glass in case of emergency type of
Yeah,
scenario.
I agree with you on that. Yeah, personally, I typically don't treat a fever unless it's in that danger zone because your body is designed to combat
100%.
that. And by administering Tylenol, Motrin, what have you, you're not letting the body do what it's designed to do.
Yeah. So if we hybridized it and we said,
Mhm.
okay, well, we're suspicious that acetaminophen might be involved in this whole thing,
Mhm.
right? So let's do it sparingly. Do
Yeah.
Tylenol, but only not just don't do it precautionary.
Yeah.
Let's only do it if you get in that danger territory. There's
Mhm.
no downside in it, right? Aside from
Yeah.
your kid feeling crappy for
Right,
longer
right.
than they probably should have,
Yep.
and then their body do what it's naturally intended to do.
Yeah, and that's the thing, even, years prior, before all of this information came out, that's typically, when I would administer, Tylenol or Motrin is, my child is visibly miserable
Yes.
because you don't wanna see your kid
Right.
miserable, and so you as a parent wanna do anything you can to help them not be miserable, but again, at the end of the day, you have to kinda weigh the risk versus benefit, and even though you think you're helping that child, are you? If you're not letting their immune system kind of do what it's designed to do. So it's tough. It's hard being a parent making those
Yeah, right.
decisions.
And when it becomes political, that's when it gets stupid because
Yeah.
parents should be able to say, okay, if they just listen to what we just said there,
Hmm.
like you're taking a risk that this may be involved in something else for the sake of sparing a little uncomfort for your kid. Are
Hmm.
you willing to let them suffer for another 6 hours while their body
Right.
combats this thing,
Hmm.
saving yourself from the possibility, the dice roll on
Right.
it contributing to a neurological disorder sometime in the future? I mean,
Yeah.
that's a real question. If you're a parent,
Hmm.
like, no, I'll take the risk. Yeah,
Hmm.
and I'll deal with this. And that's fine as long
Yeah.
as consumers are educated in that.
Yeah. And I don't think that's the case. Like I think a lot of people, I don't want to say blindly trust the science, but when things are presented to us as parents and as just individuals as safe and effective, I think before COVID, we were all like, yeah, heck yeah. We're gonna do what we think is safe and effective based off of what these people are telling us. And I think it's a good thing that people are starting to question more.
For sure.
I love it because that's what science is.
Mhm.
If it can't be questioned, it's not science. It's
Absolutely.
propaganda.
Absolutely.
And so as a scientist, question everything. We should be questioning everything. And I love that for our country and just the world. And
Yeah,
I'm
and
thankful.
the downside is you get people who have access to grind and they go full conspiracy theorists and they want to
Mhm.
push against it just for the sake of doing it,
Yeah.
not to make it better or innovate,
Right.
but just to destroy it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And then so
absolutely.
you get the propaganda on the other side that says, no, no, trust. I have to do my Anthony Fauci. But they had some of their credibility undermined by what position they took, and you knew why they were doing it.
Yeah.
But then it just fueled the other side of it, where like we can't trust any of the CDC or the NIH or anything like that.
Right.
I'm like, that's a dangerous proposition as well.
There has to be balance.
For sure.
There has to be balance because in any area of life, when things are that imbalanced, it's not good.
Right.
Yeah, it's not even just medicine and investigational drugs. Like any area of life, if one thing weighs heavier than another, that imbalance is not good.
So in my career, I've witnessed a lot of like innovative products that were coming to market. One of those was a couple of fuel cells. And what I watched from most of these products, that they threaten the status quo so much that the people who own the status quo bought the innovative products and put up on a shelf so no one ever got to experience it. They didn't threaten their business model. There was no money left to be made.
Yeah.
So I was watching this thing I was super psyched about coming onto the market, and I watched it die because its competition bought it and then made sure it never made its way to the market. I project that into the pharmaceutical side, where I think pharmaceuticals really love when there's unhealth in our communities.
Yeah.
Right? They make a lot of money the unhealthier we
on
are.
people staying sick. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so like you as someone who is like, okay, well, let's add some more options to it. Let's give the data so that great intention and in good faith things can happen.
Right.
Aren't you terrified that you are that innovative product that I'm talking about?
Well, yeah. And that's why I want to kind of be part of the change. And when I say that, what I mean is I'm at the ground level collecting the data. And so I know that what I'm submitting and what I'm collecting is true and accurate because I think what I don't want to say I think, but in the pharmaceutical world, we have to ask those questions like, is the data skewed? Is it made out to be more effective than it really is so that they can make more money on it? And I think starting at the ground level is where those things will come to light, and accurate reporting. And I guess I'll find out after, how either successful or unsuccessful my business is, whether the pharmaceutical industry appreciates that or doesn't, that we're submitting things accurately and as it should be per the protocol.
Yeah, I get that science vibe from you. Okay. And my fear is like, let's just say you're in an industry that's controversial.
Yes.
And it's funded by the people who have an interest in it going one way rather than the other. That data and research always ends up being on one side that benefits them. So it's almost like if you're in control of the data and you can take the stuff that doesn't doesn't support your claim or add to your hypothesis,
right,
then it's shelved and it's kept away from the public.
Yeah.
Independents who you don't care what the data comes up, right?
No, not at all.
It is pure data.
I have no stocks in any of these. I'm not getting rich off these big companies.
Right. So I would trust your data because win or lose, either way, you don't really care which direction it goes in. If it's good for client, good for patient, good for medical,
right,
that's all you care about. That it was
absolutely.
Pure freaking data.
Yeah. I want people to get better. I want there to be better drugs out there to help people who are suffering. Not that I don't want the pharmaceutical companies to make money, because if they do make money, in my mind, that's because the drug is effective.
Correct.
Because people are not going to take said drug if it doesn't show
as long
efficacy.
as it's not compromised. Pharmaceutical industry, we are the big innovators of the world. So many things get created because there's money flowing in those systems.
Right.
The only way they compromised, that's when I start disagreeing with it.
Yeah. Looking at, especially the weight loss industry right now, like the big popular thing is the GLP-1 therapies, and all of these other pharmaceutical companies that don't have a hand in the pot or don't have a competitor. They want to make things better than the ones that are currently out there.
What do you think the long-term effects are on like Ozempic and whatnot? Do you think we got a hell to pay down the way?
The data that I've seen so far with some of the newer classes of GLP-1s, they really do target fat loss versus, those lean muscle areas. But again, how much long-term data do we even really have to look at? A decade or two? To me, that's not long-term enough, being that the life expectancy for us is far greater than it used to be back, decades ago. So, with anything, there's going to be long-term side effects. And again, we have to weigh the risks versus the benefit, because we know right now that obesity affects many different areas and systems of our body, to the point where you can eventually die from that disease.
Because so if I'm a 400-pound person and I risk dying of heart disease, you give me Ozempic, I lose a bunch of my weight, and now I'm not going to die from heart disease anymore. The thing that I might have a complication for might be less than my heart disease.
Yes, and that goes back to assessing risk versus benefit. We have to be able to look at those things and say, is it worth the risk that I may have either this side effect or this long-term health problem, compared to if I don't treat this disease? I either will die, or it will affect the heart and the cardiovascular system, or diabetes and create that other problem where I could lose a leg and die from. There's a lot to take in with those decisions.
So if you took, like, let's just say the pharmaceuticals that release it, the brands that make a lot of money, 90% of the people who are going to take the drug are doing it for aesthetics, and they weren't really in any kind of danger for heart disease in the first place. Now, those ones, you have to consider whether or not they're willing to pay the complications when they weren't at any kind of risk.
Yeah. The thing that comes to my mind first when you say that is, yet they may not have problems right now, but that doesn't mean that a year from now they're not going to develop some major issue because of their weight.
Would you have slowed that drug down and had more studies before it got so popular in the market?
Honestly, no, because if we can see that, again, something is generally safe and effective, I think the goal is to get that out readily available to the public as quickly as possible to help mitigate some of these problems. Because again, we can't predict decades from now. There's AI that can help us predict these things based off the data, which is amazing. But even then, there's still error in that. So it's hard, because as a human, I don't want to put things in front of people that could have long-term side effects or health issues. But again, everyone is different. I could have two people, same exact lifestyle, same exact health conditions, and it affects this person differently than it affects this person.
Right.
And so there's no way to really predict how it's going to affect someone until they start taking that medication and observing these things and really paying attention to what is considered their baseline. Did they have any of these symptoms beforehand? Are these new? Are they attributed to something else that they're doing in their life? Like, can we pinpoint that it's actually this that's causing that? And that's good science. That's good, analytics trying to figure that out.
Now, in your industry, we got to go to the thesaurus and find new words for safe and effective because they've been bastardized. And
right.
The public distrusts those words more than anything else. We got to come up with something else. But even, like I will say when the COVID vaccines were happening and you had this competition between like ivermectin, right? And how we took a drug that was on the market forever and was safe for everyone. And it was almost like destroyed as a brand name, destroyed as a component.
Right.
And what interests were powerful enough to take something that was safe and effective.
Yes.
And it was destroyed in the public eye.
That, I think, brings in your own critical thinking skills and being able to kind of piece that together. And obviously we can't for certain say what the intent is. But if you use your critical thinking skills, you can kind of put the pieces together there.
Two reasonable people can say, okay, well, in order for the government to save the entire population, you had to make sure there weren't any alternatives. So great decision. Let's remove all alternatives from even on the menu so we can do this thing that's going to save lives. Seems pretty noble at that level, right?
Yeah.
But there's a certain point where we're like, well, wait a minute. Maybe we should have included ivermectin in what we told people to do. Maybe the diet and the exercise and getting sunlight and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Again, I'm picturing the doctors that have been through would be arguing with me, well, if we say that, that's too commonsensical and nobody's going to do that. They want a magic pill that they shove in their arm and solves all of their problems. So I think the psychosis the general public has, you're fighting against as much as the disease.
Yeah, absolutely. And, truly psychosis, delusional, thinking one belief that is not actually reality. And that's hard. That's tough, especially as, a researcher and working with doctors, because you can't, you could try to weigh these things with individuals so that they can make their own informed decision. But again, going back to our personal belief systems, it is very hard for someone to challenge their own belief systems and admit, like, maybe I wasn't right with this. It's crushing because think about, I'm in my mid-30s. And so something that I may have believed to be true my entire life, you get a lot of distrust learning that may not be the case. But I think that's also a good thing because then you do start to challenge things more and critically think and use your own skills and try to, put the pieces together.
But that also puts pressure on the status quo because when you go off the path, you open yourself to liabilities, and we like to sue in this society.
Yes.
And so you might have great intent, but you say something that costs a life. Where if you would have just said do the thing that was safe and effective, and would have had your backing, and you wouldn't have exposed yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the risk that I have to take as a researcher, and knowing that not everyone is going to do exactly as we say or take the recommendations. And I don't have all the recommendations. I'm smart enough to know that I don't know everything.
Right.
And I think that's what makes me a good researcher and just a good person in this field to advocate for things to be done appropriately. If that makes sense.
All right. I'm going to let's record you and your operation and tell me your story, and I'll put it at the top of the show.
Okay.
We went right into it because we're already in the
right.
So go ahead and give me your give me your background.
Okay. Like my name and everything?
All right. Sure, everything.
Okay. So I'm Cara Buente. I am the founder and CEO of Integrity First Clinical Trials. We are based out of Canfield, Ohio, embedded into a wellness clinic called Vital Evolution. And what we do is run clinical trials at the ground level. So you have your pharmaceutical companies that are trying to develop new novel treatments for a variety of different diseases and disorders. And those drugs have to go through phases of clinical trials before it gets presented to the FDA for approval to go to market, for example, for your doctor to prescribe. And so we do the ground level data collection and seeing individuals who want to participate in these clinical trials. And the background of why I founded Integrity First is a multitude of reasons. So I've been in the research industry for over a decade, started out as a research coordinator in an academic setting in a neuroimaging lab, looking at late life mood disorders, and eventually got into the industry or private side of things where we're looking at pharmaceutical companies sponsoring these clinical trials because I needed something closer to home. And that at the time was the best option for me. And I loved the fast pace of things because these pharmaceutical companies obviously want to get the best medication out there, and have options for people to have treatment options. And, I was going all over the country, setting up research sites for other companies and running the trials, supervising staff, going into these rural communities across the country. And some things had occurred with my last position where I was 20 weeks pregnant. I'm actually at risk for a major clotting event from my own personal history, and I can't travel when pregnant because of that. I have to be on blood thinners, and coincidentally was laid off without cause from that position. I was the national director of operations, and that forced me to sit back and think, what do I want to do? I love clinical trials. I love being part of, potentially better access and better medications out there for individuals. I love the science. I love collecting data and analyzing that data. But what do I want to do? Do I want to go back to corporate? Do I want to go back to these larger companies that at the snap of their fingers could say, we don't need you anymore, or our company's going a different direction?
Right.
And, I had went to a conference about a year and a half ago in Arizona. It was called Save Our Sites. And as a site level clinical researcher, this conference was amazing. It quite literally was about how do we save our local research sites, because academic research is huge. Hospital research is huge. We look at Cleveland and Pittsburgh, they're always doing clinical trials in their hospitals and with the physicians that work in those hospitals. And at this conference, I was able to talk to the person who founded the conference and has his own site network in Arizona and other site owners in the industry. And that's always been in the back of my mind. I've always thought, well, what if I did open a site? And what does it take to actually open a site? And I truly believe in the path that God has for people. I'm a very faith-based individual, and even when I tried to find investors or people who wanted to partner with me, there were little things that just weren't fully working out at that time. And looking back now and the different knowledge that I've gained in all the different positions I've held, there have always been new things that I've learned on the industry side with each position that I've had in research. And I truly believe that there were things that I had to go through and learn on the research side of things as a national director of operations, as a clinical trial manager overseeing multiple sites across the country. Things that I still had to learn that I was not previously exposed to in my prior positions to be able to do this now. And so, getting laid off and having that self-reflection and looking at the actual need here in my own community, I didn't want to go back to corporate. I'm my own corporate now. I answer to myself, and I'm able to have or be the change that I so desperately wanted to see with some of these other companies that I worked for. I'm able to now offer great and competitive compensation for my own employees, and eventually, great healthcare for them, and time off. And I have this vision of what I want to do, not just for the community, but also the people that work for me, because getting laid off at 20 weeks pregnant, expecting my third child, that was
That's
like,
rough.
yeah, it was. But again, I always believe there's a purpose and there's a reason that we go through things. And I think God did for me what I couldn't do for myself, because I wasn't happy. I was traveling a lot. I was away from my 2 little kids and my husband, as it was, and then expecting a third child. And I had a lot of complications in the summer from my pregnancy, where I was hospitalized a lot. And so I can't imagine if I was working that corporate job, very pregnant, 20 weeks pregnant, you're halfway there. But, as I got into the summer, things got a lot worse. And so it sounds silly, because it did put a lot of financial burden on us. I'm grateful that I got laid off, because not only did it eliminate any corporate stress I had, and I was able to truly focus on my pregnancy and my family, but this also lit a fire under my ass to do what I really want to do, and helping people in my own community, and really pushing me in that direction that I believe God wants me to go in.
Yeah, God's order and timeline always fascinates me. Every time where I'm in the suck and I hate it, after the fact, I'm like, shit, if I would have not been put in that, there was no way this thing would have happened.
Yeah. And being a scientist, I like to control things. I like variables that I can control.
Yes.
And so when these uncontrollable things happened, I really had to dive deeper into scripture and into my own personal belief system, and just kind of be still instead of trying to control it and trying to find that next thing, just based off of my personal experience of God always providing, and having a design for my life and having a path for my life. It wasn't until, I'm going to get emotional, but it was not until I surrendered, and I'm like, all right, I'm not going to try to get another, because I was applying and I'm like, why the hell am I not hearing back for, my resume is stacked. My CV is I've done a lot in research. I'm a published author. I've done every single position, and been successful and mitigated issues in clinical trials that other people didn't find. And so I was getting mad. I'm like, why am I not landing any of these positions that I'm overqualified for at this point? And it wasn't until I just put my hands up and I said, I trust that your path is, and your plan is far greater than anything that Carabenti could design for my own life. And it's just, since then, the pieces have just been falling in place, just almost in my lap. It's crazy.
Oh, so beautiful.
It's crazy. Just meeting up with, I was at a birthday party, and just in small talk with someone who has been friends with my husband since my husband was a teenager. Haven't really maintained contact as a regular friend, but here and there, oh, how you doing? And things like that. Met them at a birthday party, found out that they owned this wellness clinic. And this was right before I got laid off. And it's just funny how things have fallen into place since then. It's remarkable.
And acknowledgement. God's like, Kara, I got this.
Yeah.
Little nudge.
Yeah.
Keep on.
Well, and that's the thing. It's I believe that we are given these signs all the time, whether or not we recognize them and acknowledge that maybe this is the path we should take. Because again, humans, I think we're just generally stubborn, like to do things the way that we want to do things. But like I said, once I kind of put my hands up and said, okay, I'm gonna sit back and trust that something will come to fruition. And then I get a random text from a colleague that I worked with a couple years ago, and she's like, hey, I know you're on maternity leave and loving it, but I might have a trial opportunity for weight loss. Are you interested? And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. I've been meeting with all these pharmaceutical companies and all these people, throughout the summer, throughout me, being in the hospital from the pregnancy. And this was right after I had the baby. And so, looking at the timeline of things, I was supposed to focus on myself and my children during that time. And then it's as soon as I had the baby, God's like, all right, now.
Gone.
Yeah.
Faith isn't easy, right? It's not always, it challenges you in a lot of different ways.
The best way that I can describe it, at least from my own personal experiences, is having faith doesn't mean that you're not going to go through storms, right? But what it does mean, at least for me, is that your boat isn't going to sink when you go through those storms.
Yep.
And I've experienced that personally.
Man, I love that story.
Yeah.
So one more question about your practice. So when you guys are putting research together and you're doing clinical trials, is this something that you're contracted for the research? Do you have certain criteria that you have to hit in order to get those contracts, or are they funded completely and wholly by a company?
They are funded completely and wholly by the company, but we, of course, have to get selected for those trials.
Okay.
So what I've been doing is I have like a little QR code on flyers and things that I've been posting on our Integrity First Facebook page, where people can go to that little QR code and it goes directly to a Google form that tells us what the community is interested in. So there's little like check marks for different therapeutic indications, cardiovascular, obesity, weight loss, diabetes, and then a little other section that they can put in, rheumatoid arthritis or whatever the community or the person filling out that form is struggling with, mental health, what have you. That form gives me data of what actual people in my town and community are struggling with. And so what I can then do is kind of scour the market and look at the different clinical trials that are either not yet recruiting or are actively recruiting and adding sites to their network for their trials. And so I can be picky with that in selecting or submitting what's called a feasibility questionnaire, or contacting the pharmaceutical company and saying, hey, I am X, Y, and Z. This is what I do. I'm embedded into a wellness clinic. These are the population numbers that I have. And then that kind of starts the conversation. Further on, what happens is they come on site and do kind of like an inspection. They, I could say I have all the equipment in the world, but then they get on site and maybe I don't have X, Y, and Z that I said that I have. And so they're just doing their due diligence and making sure that you are capable of conducting the trial as you say. So, and that's what recently occurred. So I had a representative come on site to double check our site and say, okay, you have calibrated medical equipment. You get calibrations yearly to make sure that your measurements are accurate. You have the appropriate storage for the medication, freezer, fridge. You have an ability to collect samples. And so it's a very long process of getting selected because they're also very picky with who they have do their trials, because they want high numbers. They want people who can actually perform on these clinical trials. And I'm way too competitive to admit to something that I maybe can't do. I'm very competitive. And so if I say I can do something, you better believe I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it at 150%. So I'm not going to choose a trial that, we're looking for the unicorn patient that's running around in a forest somewhere that we can't catch. I'm going to target things that a lot of people are suffering from and could potentially benefit from. And then, of course, once we are selected as a site, there's a whole startup process, but we are given what is called inclusion-exclusion criteria, going back to a portion of your question. And it's basically a bulleted list of things that people have to be included in the clinical trial, and a list of things that they cannot have. A lot of times people might not even know that they have underlying health conditions, or, I'm not checking my blood sugar daily. And so there could be a chance that someone's blood glucose level is really, really high or really, really low, and hypoglycemia, and they don't know about it. But then they come into us and do this screening visit, which is at no cost, no insurance. We go through a basic pre-screening to see, just based on the basic eligibility criteria, if it looks like they would be eligible, based off of those bullet points. But then it's a really comprehensive screening when they come in at no charge, and we're drawing labs, looking at all types of different body systems and the functionality of those systems. We're looking at the risks and benefits. Again, we're consenting them during that process. So we're not doing any procedures, even so much as collecting labs or even taking someone's weight, until they consent to being in the clinical trial. So we do a lot on our end to make sure that they are going to be healthy enough to be in the trial.
Yeah, and it sounds like this criteria is science people trying to make sure that their data sampling is going to be as pure as possible,
Yes.
not skewed or biased or anything like that.
Exactly. Because, we can't include people that might have diseases or disorders that could really not just affect their physical health, but also the data too, because we have to have some type of control.
Right.
And granted, can't control everything. There's things that people can do outside of the clinical trial that they don't tell us about, or, we can't literally like put them in a box and control them. So
Now your samples, is it like tens of people, hundreds of people, thousands? Like what's your basic group?
So it depends on the phase of the trial. So phases 1 through 4, the phase 1 trials, we don't have the site capabilities to do a phase 1. Typically, those are overnight trials where someone comes in to participate and stays for a few days overnight to be monitored literally 24/7, because we're looking at that point at safety. And there's no way to know truly if that medication or drug is safe if they're going home and we can't monitor them. So the phase 1s are really, really, I don't want to say invasive, but they're very heavily monitored. And then you get the phase 2 where we're looking at, is it effective or is it not effective? So the phase 3, which I like the phase 3 trials. We're looking at higher numbers of individuals now because it's already gone through the preliminary phases. We generally can say that it is safe and it is working towards the target of what we want it to do. Now we need a lot of people to figure out which dose. So in phase 3 trials, typically there's going to be multiple levels in the trial, which are called arms. And so in those arms that you could potentially be randomized to, where the computer chooses, okay, this person goes in this arm that starts at 50 milligrams, or this person goes into a placebo arm. We don't have control over that. But I also get to pick the trials that, even if they do have a placebo arm where someone is getting essentially a sugar pill or a sugar injection, it's very important to me as a researcher and just caring about people that at the end of the trial, they get the option to be on open label active medication. And so
That's why they signed up.
Exactly. Yeah, they're not signing up to get a sugar pill. Like I could just get a sugar pill, in my kitchen. And so as a site owner, I like to choose those ones that give people that option at the end of the trial to be on active medication. So phase 3 is kind of the bread and butter of what I like, because it gives more people access and they're looking at high numbers. So looking at recruiting a lot of people for the phase 3s.